It's the Redbird Reboot podcast. Are you ready to get rebooted, Cardinals fans? He settles down, at least in the zone, and does not stop running.
Blake Murphy.
This is the identity for the Arizona Cardinals.
The run defense is just horrendous, and it's been horrendous for the Cardinals for a long time.
And Marcos Labrada.
He's going to bring over his philosophy. It should make it better.
Present the hottest NFL podcast from the country's hottest state.
He should be turning around the logo.
Actually, some breaking news we can cover here. This popped up just about, 6 minutes ago.
It's Redbird Reboot.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans. Welcome into the Redbird Reboot podcast. I'm Blake Murphy 7, joined with, of course, Pancake Soul, Marcos Labrada. Guys, today we are looking at a Chiefs-Eagles Super Bowl, followed by a great season, which of course turns out into the same two of the last 3 years teams, unfortunately. We've got a Pro Bowl, of course, that's going on this week, and some big Arizona Cardinals news when it comes to some major shakeup on that coaching staff. Before we get started here, Marcos, I'm having a good Saturday. How are you doing out there for all the Cardinals fans in the nation?
Well, I'm doing well. And speaking about that Super Bowl, I have literally every clip of that Super Bowl between the Chiefs and the Eagles. And the reason why I had that clip is because I was doing research on Jonathan Gannon, because Jonathan Gannon was coaching up that defense. So that's pretty interesting that they're right back to it once again. This time they're not in our building. They're in New Orleans, of course. But it's pretty interesting how everything goes full circle when it comes to that. We'll talk a little bit more about when it comes to the construction of teams that go to the Super Bowl. But other than that, I'm doing really well. And of course, it's a beautiful weather so far, but it's starting to pick up with the temperature and stuff, and we better enjoy it while we still can.
Yes, for sure. Let's start with the biggest news of the day for the most part, which is going to be the Arizona Cardinals do lose their offensive line coach to the Dallas Cowboys. So Cowboys go ahead and hire away the Cardinals offensive line coach Clayton Adams. Adams is a guy who had been quite a few seasons with Jonathan Gannon. So he had been actually with the Indianapolis Colts from 2019 to 2022. Ended up kind of coming over, at least worked as Stanford's offensive line coach and run game coordinator. Cardinals finished 4th in the NFL in rushing yards, but 2nd in rushing average. And this is one of the things that we talked about last year was they wanted to be a run-heavy team. Jonathan Gannon wanted them to be a run-first team. And we ended up seeing good success for the most part of that season. We saw 1,000 yards for James Conner. We saw also at least good development from Paris Johnson Jr. underneath Adams. And he goes to Brian Schottenheimer and the Dallas Cowboys. I know there were some Cardinals fans were seeing this news and were like, okay, now you're starting to pick our coaches away. This is not good. There were others who were going, hey, finally our team's good enough that other people are getting our coaches to get a promotion. We'll see how much of a play caller he'll be with Brian Schottenheimer, but definitely was one of those guys who probably was an underrated part of this last Cardinals season. What are some of your thoughts, at least with Adams? Do you think that this was a solid move by the Cowboys? Should the Cardinals have done more to try to keep him? What do you think, at least with Adams, before we get into the replacement, which just announced this morning?
Well, unfortunately, it is it's not so much of a sneaky move by the Cowboys, but they were able to give something that the Cardinals couldn't give them. So they couldn't give him a promotion at the position. They couldn't give that, obviously, because Drew Petzing's our offensive coordinator. And had Drew Petzing been hired up, it doesn't fully guarantee that Clayton Adams wasn't going to get picked anyway, because then it's up to the Cardinals to make the decision of whether or not they were going to elevate him to offensive coordinator. We weren't even talking about him being even a contender for that. We were talking about Clayton Adams staying as the offensive line, coach and stuff. So they were able to give him what we couldn't give him, and it's not a lateral move. That he's becoming the offensive coordinator. But this is what I'm thinking in my mindset. Schottenheimer's still making the play calls. That's going to be one of the things that I believe he's still going to do with Dallas. They brought him over, gave him a pay raise. They gave him an upgrade at the position, but they're still going to have him heavily focus on the offensive line of the Dallas Cowboys, because they're looking at the success that the Cardinals had with their offensive line and the stability that we've had, especially taking over like he did and immediately seeing offensive line success. It's crazy to see it right from the get-go and then elevate that in year 2. That's going to make you pop out to the NFL, and they're gonna look at you and say like that guy is really somebody that we need to keep our eye on. And if we need to upgrade at a position where we're starting to rebuild, we need to start putting pieces together that like have not only good experience but like can do us some good. And as we know, Dallas loves talking like when it comes to Dallas, they've had their success when it comes to offensive line. They are the one team that I can say that is the proof that like if you do draft high with the offensive linemen and you do build that way, you can have a stout line. It's not always the case, but they're the only exception in the NFL.
Yep, and it looks like at least that Clayton Adams will be joining Matt Eberflus under Brian Schottenheimer. And it does seem like Schottenheimer is going to call his own plays, so you're probably looking at more of a run game coordinator type of role as a result for Clayton Adams. I think it's kind of similar to with Bruce Arians when he always had Harold Goodwin on his staff. You knew that he was the offensive coordinator in name, but it was Bruce calling the shots. You had the guy like Goodwin was helping with the O line and also the run game. Yeah, it's one of those spots at least where with Cardinals fans, one of the things that you talk about is when your team gets better, guys are going to be poached from your organization. And as a result, you have to be able to do turnover, to be able to at least like let go of coaches who are you can upgrade or improve over, and have coaches that you're going to have to just simply replace. And a lot of that does come down to the amount of guys who want to play for you. So one of the things that we've seen with the Arizona Cardinals is that with Jonathan Gannon, they've got at least a direct connection to quite a few guys around that either they've had experience with before or at least have had different connections that are able to get pay raises. And one of those is with Justin Fry, who is the Cardinals' new offensive line coach, formerly of the Ohio State University. He helped coach one Paris Johnson as well as the rest of their offensive linemen this year. A lot of injuries and some changes. Had another offensive lineman in, I believe, DeJuan Jones, who he was coaching, who's, I believe, starting for the Browns. He also was previously the OC for Chip Kelly at UCLA. So what's interesting about that connection is he had 1 year with John Gaines, Cardinals backup center. He was actually his position coach for 1 year. So a lot of Cardinals connections that you have for the most part. We'll talk about some of those other connections that he has with offensive linemen in the draft this year. But this is one of those places where it's not just a proven sort of name that comes through. It's a guy who like has actually developed and put some of these top guys and coaches into the NFL. And to make matters even closer, one of those guys is Paris Johnson. So like you're talking about Paris walks in, his old position coach is there. This is one of those connections at least where it does really show, I think in some cases, when you've got a Sean McVay style head coach. Your goal then is like the offense is going to rise this, guys will get poached who come underneath you. It's going to be then whoever your defensive guy is. There's going to be defensive coaches who either you end up with a Sean McDermott who has a Josh Allen, your quarterback, like you're going to get offense that way so you can just focus on the defense. You're going to have some defensive guys who don't have that quarterback, don't have that offense and struggle. And every like once in a blue moon, you'll have a Mike Tomlin who doesn't matter if it's a quarterback who's there, doesn't matter the offensive line and the defensive line who's there. He'll still figure out a way to be able to make it to the postseason. This is more of a CEO type style that the Cardinals have gone with. Jonathan Gannon, he's got influence, but he's not calling the defensive plays. That's what Nick Rallis is. He's not calling the plays on offense. That's what Drew Petzing is for. So when you're talking about having what that CEO model needs to succeed, it's when your coaches get poached. Your ability to bring other coaches underneath you to be able to replace or move forward as both head coach and general manager. This is something I think, Marcos, that we can talk a little bit about the Arians, Wilkes, Kingsbury regimes. It does feel like being able to add a coach of a good enough caliber that you get to kind of poach him away from a consistently good Ohio State job. It does seem like it's a win for Cardinals fans who look at Jonathan Gannon as a potential fix to a lot of these issues that seem to have plagued them with whenever they become good, they seem to immediately drop off a cliff. Marcos, I haven't been able to hear you as well, so double check at least if you're on mute.
Oh, hello.
Hey,
Can you hear me?
that
Yeah,
is
sorry about that.
you're good,
Anyways,
sir.
I'm going to go a little little bit off topic here, but like every single time they put up a picture of a coach, and every time they get hired or whatnot, they pick the one where he's always yelling. And I was like, yeah, that's a prototypical coach picture. He's like, yeah, he's yelling. No,
Yeah.
that's how you know he's a good coach. But yeah, the connection is what is important here for Cardinals fans to be able to like not only take on, but like Ohio State just won a championship, and there was supposed to be a situation where, and it's not like they're not producing good offensive linemen. I mean, we just got one like from like we just poached one a couple of years ago in Paris Johnson, who was a guard, and then it got moved over to tackle, and then that's where he saw success. So this guy is able to at least be he's somebody who can look at talent and then say like, look, this is what we're gonna get out of you, and this is what we're gonna get, and then we're gonna make you into like a first round, second round pick. If not, make you the best offensive lineman in the draft, which is what he did with Paris Johnson. So when he comes over as continuity, coming from an like not an organization, but like from a program that's like a big five, like it's one of the top programs in the league. Nobody thought that Ohio State was gonna continue to flourish after after the unnamed one left to Jacksonville to become the head coach. Um, they never thought that this was gonna pick up, and it did. So they not only picked up as a lower ranked school in the actual rankings, they made it to the championship and won. And part of that is because of offensive line play. So take some pride in knowing that not only that we poach somebody from a really great program, even if it's in the college ranks, somebody that knows how to develop like offensive line, offensive linemen to make them into high like draft picks and whatnot. But somebody who kept getting like those high, like 5-star, 4-star recruits and stuff, and then getting the most out of them, plus having the connection with Paris Johnson. I think if anything, that was the main thing that came through. I believe they probably had some talks with Paris Johnson throughout the years, and talked about him throughout his college years. And I guarantee you, he gave glowing reviews about Justin Fry, and talking about how well he coached them up and whatnot. Because that's part of what the Cardinals are gonna. Well, that's part of what coaching staffs are gonna do to their players, especially if they have success with them and stuff like, hey, what did you do during college and what was this? So they probably heard it from Paris Johnson to begin with, and from the other players like Marvin Harrison Jr., who wasn't coached below him, but will have, some, he was in the same room as him. So he probably got glowing reviews, and the Cardinals were like, this is a no brainer. Clayton Adams, I said. Sorry, I forgot what.
Justin Fry. Justin Fry is there. But yeah, Clayton Adams is
Clayton
correct
Adams,
as far
this
as.
is his name. Yeah, my bad. It is Clayton Adams. So Clayton Adams going over to to take that promotion and whatnot. You couldn't replace him with a better type of, position coach for like our offensive line than Justin Fry, coming from like Ohio State and stuff. And the reason why I'm saying that, it's going to be really hard to poach another like high top like coordinator out there. You're not going to get like the Eagles offensive line coach. So this is something that like I would say get excited about this.
Yeah, a lot of people were like, oh, look at like the Eagles with some of their backup coaches from the offensive side, some guys who have connections with Jonathan Gannon. When you take a look at the background for Justin Fry, what's really interesting is that there isn't actually really that much crossover between Fry or Jonathan Gannon or even Monty Ossenfort. Those were guys who essentially were over there in the NFL most of the time. Fry at least started off at Indiana, was an offensive lineman, went on as a GA, helped work with Marquise and Mike Pouncey, Marcus Gilbert, who spent one injured year with the Cardinals. Maurice Hurt was another one who was there. Went up to Temple, so he spent some time in Philly, but not at the same time as Jonathan Gannon. Ended up going to Boston College for the most part, and then went with Chip Kelly at UCLA, coaching up Cardinals offensive lineman. John Gaines was part of that, at least, as far as I think there was 1 year of crossover. But this feels like it's one of those areas, Marcos, in which this feels like it's kind of a Cardinals are going to the source of where they're draft evaluating a lot of not just the players who are there, but also the guys who coach those players. So this seems that the Cardinals have gone and said, hey, we love Paris Johnson. We love Ohio State offensive linemen. We can get this guy a promotion, bring him up into the NFL. And the fact that it's not someone who's previously been connected to Monty Austinfort or Jonathan Gannon shows that that's something that you can do if you're the Cardinals, being able to have either a reputation or a connection, like you said. It might have been something as simple as, hey, we've been scouting other coaches. We know this is a coach that we really like. He's on the up and up. We can try to give him that opportunity when we need to. And B, like you said, talking to some of the other guys there, talking to Paris. Maybe you're even in a place going, hey, look, we love Ohio State offensive linemen. If we can just go and get the guy who develops all of those guys and be able to poach him, he could then be on his next step up to being an offensive coordinator, maybe at the NFL level, or putting that back into some sort of a collegiate head coaching job where there's a lot of money that's happening now for those gigs. It's one of those places where I think what we've seen in the past, Marcos, is previously with the Cardinals and Bruce Arians, we got to see he had Todd Bowles came along with him. He had Byron Leftwich came along with him. Some of those coaches were able to exit. You know, James Betcher was the coach that followed Todd Bowles. And guess what? Cardinals made the NFC Championship game that season. Defense didn't really drop off in 2016. It was just Cardinals were a lot weaker as far as their depth came in 2016. Even in 2017 with James Betcher, they at least were consistent. It wasn't like that you saw a coordinator leave, things went terrible. When it came to the post Bruce Arians time, though, most of these guys, I think, who were coordinator or line coaches, a lot of those guys ended up being Steve Keim hires. And part of that's because you look at Steve Wilkes, who did he bring in? Well, he didn't bring in very many guys on the offensive staff. They kept Byron Leftwich, but it was Steve Keim's connection having to go and bring in the former Broncos head coach, who ended up lasting, I think it was 7 games with the Cardinals. That's one of the things that we can always talk about with, I think it was Mike McCoy, that's his name. That was a guy where you see the Denver connection. Mike McCoy and Vance Joseph were both Denver Broncos head coaches. Both of those guys were people that Steve Keim brought in because Cliff did not have a list of contacts in the NFL. So you're able to then see when it comes to the offensive line coaches that popped up there. There was another guy that Steve brought in for the most part, at least like that, which was, I think it was the O-line coach. This is the one that was fired in Hard Knocks, Sean Kugler. That was another guy who was connected with the Broncos. And one of the, yeah, exactly. And that was one of the things, at least, that is really interesting is when you talk about how people get hired and some of those connections. I think as Jim Harbaugh said, sometimes he compares himself to Moses, says, oh, I'm leaning on my staff. But really, your staff in a lot of different ways can be just as important as the head coach in most cases. Good example is you take a look at the Philadelphia Eagles 2 years ago. They make a Super Bowl run. Last year, they decided to promote Matt Patricia, and then on the offensive side, they put Brian Johnson as the replacement offensive coordinator. They get eliminated from playoffs in the first game. They just lose tons of games down the stretch, went from the number 1 seed to essentially almost dropping out of the division lead. And this year, they bring in a Kellen Moore. They then also go and bring in a veteran defensive head coach who everyone seems to be running his system in Vic Fangio. And that just shows Eagles general manager and head coach, they've got the ability to grab a Vic Fangio and bring him in. They have the ability to grab a Kellen Moore and be able to bring him in. This is something that I think we're starting to see now, whereas the first offseason where the Cardinals have lost coaches, we can see at least now through this first hire, a bit of Cardinals have the ability to replenish their stock. And that's something that I think is important as a Cardinals fan, because we're looking at some of the guys like a Nick Rallis will probably be a hot commodity next year. We've already seen a head coaching interview for Drew Petzing. If you're going to be a Cardinals fan wanting something that this team has never had in sustained success, this is the first step to showing that, yes, this might be possible for the Cardinals. Should they continue this trajectory, find success, they might be able to keep it going into the future.
Yeah, and that's unfortunately like the great equalizer right there is having a team that's good enough that your like coaches start going other places and whatnot. So you're glad because of that, but you could also be the Lions where you're so good that the worst case scenario happened to them. They kind of knew that they were going to lose their offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. They knew that going in, but the whole preface of like not going into panic mode about that was, hey, we're gonna lose these guys, but we're gonna win a Super Bowl because we're the best team in the NFL. We're the best team in the NFC. There's no way we're gonna lose to the Washington Commanders because they're a Cinderella story, but they're not gonna beat us in no way, shape, or form. Especially not beat us by putting 40 points on us and everything. Of course, that's not what ended up happening, and they lost, and now they're losing their coordinators, both of them. So it's kind of like
Yeah.
I would say if I'm a Lions fan, I'm probably a little bit depressed about the direction of my team because not only did that happened when we lost in the first game in the playoffs by like embarrassing fashion to a team that had no business making it that far. So if you're in that scenario, yes, you can feel horrendous about how your team's direction is going to be because now you're like, who am I going to bring in that's going to fill in the shoes of a Ben Johnson, and who's going to fill in the shoes of the defensive coordinator as well? Like it's pretty much going to be like it's going to be one of those situations where that coaching spot is going to be very desired. It's just filling in those shoes is going to be what the difficult part is for the organization. So they're going to have to go from within to try to keep that same philosophy, that same culture within the building, and just start like bringing people up. Which is the case with the Cardinals. If they get to that position, they're going to have to start thinking the same thing. Do we get somebody that we can fill in that spot like we did with Lane Adams just now? Or do we promote somebody that knows the scheme? Like if Nick Rawls goes and takes a job, do we just give the next person up? Like, hey, let's keep the same defense. Let's keep the same familiarity. You were, obviously you were in the room with Nick Rawls. You have his playbook. You know what kind of, practices they host during the season and then during preseason because you were there with Nick Rawls in his coaching room. Keep that going. You're just going to be the next Nick Rawls. Just don't change anything about that. Or like, hey, we're just going to go get Spags because somehow he decided he's going to leave an organization that's winning so many rings that we're just going to like give him like a $1 billion contract to come like coach for the Cardinals. Like, yeah, that's I'm just joking about that side. But what I'm
Yeah.
saying is like those are your two options. And other than that, it's just getting somebody that you're not familiar with. It's like, oh, this guy, he had some success. He coached this school, so he brings that philosophy and whatnot. But that's the difficulty of having a good team. And also it comes down to your owner. Your owner is also a
Mm.
person that can come in and just come in with the big bucks. Unfortunately, when it comes to upgrades, that's not possible. You can't keep somebody in the building and pay them more if they decide, hey, I'm getting a head coaching job, a head coaching gig. I'm not getting one here. I'm going to go ahead and take that. So that's out of our control.
Yeah, I think so too, at least. It's going to be really interesting to see how it goes as far as with the Cardinals, because again, the expectations this year are going to be you go from a near playoff team to a playoff team, is what people are hoping here for the most part. One of the comments, at least, we want to read here from Dana R, talking about at least like position coaches, building the relationships. Like we said, you're also, when you're a general manager and head coach, you want to be scouting out other coaches, making those relationships as well for the most part. And then the last one, of course, at least from Dana, is about the Fangio philosophy of bend, not breaking. I think that what we've seen with Philly has been that a lot of it has to do also with the amount of not just talent up front, with a big emphasis on the rush up front, then having good secondary play in the back. Eagles didn't have like a Pro Bowl linebacker. They kind of found Zach Bond off of the scrap heap, and he ended up having a Pro Bowl caliber season. I think with the moving from quarters to cover three that you're mentioning, I think some of that was something that the Cardinals wanted to do in order to like maximize the strength of their players. You talk about last year and how everything was kind of weak when it came to the cornerback room for Arizona, the safety room, everyone learning the new scheme, all of the other issues. We saw Buda Baker playing back away from the line vast majority of the time in trying to just kind of limit teams with those explosive plays because they didn't have the defensive line. The linebackers were basically just Kaiser White. It was a really rough starting from scratch spot that the Cardinals were last year. This year, we actually saw their defense thrive a bit because they put Buda blitzing more, put him more into the box. They also were able to actually put Garrett Williams into that safety rotation, moving guys around. So there was like, you'd see Garrett Williams in the nickel spot, he would drop back to corner, Buda would be able to shift down, and you would bring him and Kaiser on like a stunt blitz. So all of a sudden, you're able to see a little bit of how when we talk about what Nick Rallis has been able to bring, why he's going to be a hot commodity. In that Buda Baker last year probably shouldn't have gotten into the Pro Bowl. He got in as a legacy guy this year. He did get into the Pro Bowl and absolutely deserved it. Cardinals did get him that contract extension. And that does shift, of course, kind of wanting to segue into talking a little bit about the Pro Bowl. Oh, this is a Pro Bowl in which we've seen Buda Baker and first timer Trey McBride have been able to actually make the Pro Bowl. There's a couple of guys who were alternates into James Conner, Paris Johnson, who are not going to be playing in the game. They just guys didn't drop out in front. Some people you'll see that get selected, others are hurt and decide not to play at the game overall. What we've seen, at least with Baker, is that he's been able to make the Pro Bowl, and this is, I have to remember exactly which Pro Bowl in a row this is here, Marcos, but I know that he made it originally as a special teamer back in 2017, and believe that he, double check his career that he's had here. I'll get this pulled up here, at least on the screen. He's made All-Pro one season, and as far as it goes for with the rest of the Pro Bowl level teams, he was All-Pro first team. I think this is in 2017 for special teams. First team All-Pro in 2020. Also was All Conference 2021 was All-Pro, and then 2024. This is the first year he made second team. As far as for making the Pro Bowl, it is a fan category that does end up voting, so that's something that you go. But also the big news: Trey McBride, very first team. First team was not in the cards for him. As long as George Kittle's in the league, it's going to be really hard. The Lions have the guy now. There's a good level of guys in the NFC. I think it was a shame that he didn't quite get to that first team spot, but at least recognizing that the Cardinals, as far as it goes, have their captain on defense in Buda. They have kind of a new sort of captain or superstar in Trey McBride at the tight end position. You see a Pro Bowl from a Paris Johnson next year in a stacked class, that would be a great sign for him. It's just going to be hard to see him get up into that upper echelon because there's so many good offensive linemen in the NFC. This is one of the things that I think as Cardinals fans, you talk about what we're looking for is that next step in evolution, which is going to be Pro Bowlers who are not drafted under the Steve Keim era, Trey McBride being of the last draft class of those. You're hoping to see a Paris Johnson make it. You're hoping to see a Garrett Williams take that step up. Eventually, you'd like to be able to see Kyler Murray have that like caliber of season. These are things I think that you can talk about as a positive for the Cardinals, considering back in the 2022 season, pretty depleted as far as not just the level of play and respect, but the national attention that you have now is something that people aren't going to watch this game the same way, but you can at least have it be good for those players. It adds to their resume. What are some of your thoughts about the Cardinals Pro Bowlers this year in Buda and Trey?
All right, so I'm going to answer that, and there's a couple of comments that I wanted to kind of comment on and everything. But all right, so first, when it comes to like the Pro Bowlers, well, you know how we're with the Cardinals, so you have to have a big name, just like you mentioned, legacy player, Buda Baker. We always have that token player. We had that in Fitzgerald for so many years. We had that with Patrick Peterson. Even if they had a bad year, they were the ones that were like supposedly representing the Cardinals. It looks bad on the NFL if they don't have a team that has at least one Pro Bowler in it, because then they don't feel like they have representation for every team, which means they're not going to have any eyeballs on the Pro Bowl or on the events from that team's fan base and whatnot. And there's going to be a lot of, outrage and whatnot. I love like the fact that Trey finally got the recognition that he deserved. He finally was able to get in. Paris Johnson Jr. was an alternate, which is like kind of par for the course. Yeah, like there's a lot of times where the first year that you deserve to go to the Pro Bowl for a team that's like on the bottom end of the spectrum, you usually don't get it. The second year is usually when you get named. But it usually works out this way. You get an alternate spot, even though you deserve it, but you're not from a big team, or you weren't getting a lot of wins out there, which means you weren't getting a lot of national coverage. You're not going to get like that starter spot, or even like this other spot. So he got the alternate, which means he's going to get the recognition. People are going to start looking up his name and remembering, hey, that's the guy that went to number 6 to the Cardinals. The Cardinals traded up to go get him and stuff. Like, oh, look, he's having a good year now. Like he's being recognized out there, which is always great. there was a couple of names that I was kind of surprised throughout the years that the Cardinals weren't select. This is what pissed me off about like the Cardinals and not getting their national media. But don't remember JJ Watt 2 years ago or in 2022, he
Hmm.
had himself what, like 12 sacks, 12 and a half
Yep.
sacks as a defensive end. He didn't get named to the Pro Bowl, and he's a legacy name. Like,
Yeah.
people know who JJ Watt is, and he still didn't get selected. So when it comes to Pro Bowls, I mostly think about it for the player's perspective, as in money. So I'm like, I'm
Hmm.
happy for you because you're getting the name recognition, and that means a bump in money when it comes to contracts and whatnot. But when it comes to like the actual Pro Bowl nowadays, is more of like, hey, like, hey, we need to get everybody, like, at least one player from each team, and we're gonna go for the big names as usual. Who's gonna bring more eyeballs? Oh, hey, look, Bobby Wagner's still playing at elite level. Let's get him on there and whatnot. Oh, remember when Luke Kuechly and Bobby Wagner got over Jordan Hicks in the
Hmm.
2019 season, when Jordan Hicks had 100, the much maligned, which I've criticized him a lot, but 2019 he had an elite year.
Yeah.
He had stacked like the he had stacked like he stat he had the craziest stats for when it came to a first time linebacker in a new system, with 100 and what, like 54 tackles,
Yeah.
134
He's still
tackles.
playing today too. He's still
Yeah,
part of that
same today
defense.
and whatnot. But he had himself a really good season for his first year. Didn't even get over Bobby Wagner and Luke Kuechly. Look at their stats in 2019 and tell me that he didn't have a better year than they did. It's just how it is and whatnot. So one thing that I'm going to go ahead and address right here is so for one right here, when we have reporters asking questions to these coaches and stuff, a lot of times they think to themselves like, why am I going to make this more like confusing when it comes to like answering this question? And sometimes they just don't want to delve too much in it because they think to themselves, oh, they're not really going to understand what the hell I'm talking about anyway and whatnot. But then of course they're not going to try to talk more schematics with them, because they're mostly, I know that a bunch of these coaches are kind of annoyed to have to do them, and then they think to themselves, "Well, we're just gonna do the same coach speak. We're just gonna do the same coach talk and whatnot." But for what was said when they shifted from like quarters to cover three, was because I believe it's more of a run fit situation. The Cardinals weren't as bad against the run as they usually are every single year, but they were still kind of bad. So they were playing Buda Baker from like the second level, kind of creeping from the third level down and whatnot. And they allowed him to do that so he could storm the alley on a lot of these run plays, because he's really good at being able to stop the run and then be able to plug up some of the holes in the run scheme. Like, so if they had a run like if they had certain people like taking one gap and whatnot, he was taking the one that was designated as the bubble to make it seem like, hey, this is an open gap that our line can attack, and then Buddha comes from like the second to the third level to be able to plug that up. So, and plus we don't have the corners to be able to like just maintain that cover three and that quarters and whatnot. We mostly keep him that way because we don't want him to get beat over the top. But
Yeah.
anyways, that's all I wanted to address.
I think that's good, at least overall, too. We'll see exactly how Cardinals will be able to adjust with the defensive gaps that they're having in their scheme. One of the things we also wanted to talk about is just being able to look at the Super Bowl. So we've got a Super Bowl which is going to have Mahomes versus Ertz. Sorry, Hurts, excuse me. That's not the other Philadelphia Eagle versus one Kyler Murray. What does Kyler Murray have to do with all of these other top quarterbacks? And I think that one thing we can talk about, Marcos, here is when it comes to a Super Bowl level quarterback, there's people who have had the camp of roll with Kyler Murray. He's at least going to be good enough to kind of get you to a Super Bowl. We've at least seen some of the skill or ability, maybe build up a team around him. We've seen some approaches that have said to move on from Kyler Murray. He's not the guy. You're kind of limited. You have a ceiling with him. And then there's kind of the unknown category, which a lot of people may still fall into, which is let's see what he does next year, kind of make a decision on some of that. I think it's interesting when you take a look at the way that this Super Bowl has turned out. You take a look in the AFC, you've got your Joe Burrows, Lamar Jackson, CJ Stroud had a down year this year. you kind of go through this whole entire area, at least with all of these top quarterbacks. You take a look in the NFC, you had Jaden Daniels as a rookie, got there up against a Jalen Hurts. Some of the other guys, it's like Matthew Stafford's getting older. The Niners have been back there the last couple of times. They've had some injuries this year around Brock Purdy. A lot of the questions are, hey, when you have to make a decision on Kyler Murray, as far as the contract, as far as does a contract renewal come up potentially in the next 1 or 2 years, how does he fit into this equation? Because a Jalen Hurts, a lot of people look at his statistics and say, hey, this guy's not been lighting up the stat sheet like Jaden Daniels had been. He is not, putting up the kind of caliber of play of some of these quarterbacks we are seeing in the AFC. Which approach should the Cardinals take? Do you move on from Murray? Do you keep him? There's a lot that can kind of be said, but I think at the end of the day, Marcos, one of the things that I'm curious to hear your thoughts on is how does Kyler fit in with the rest of these quarterbacks as far as how difficult it seems to knock off this Kansas City Chiefs team, which now seems to be a lot of people are even looking back at the Tom Brady Patriots with Bill Belichick going, oh, there's so much nostalgia. It was a different game these days. People have forgotten how hated the Patriots were already because of this Chiefs team with Mahomes, Andy Reid, and Travis Kelce. How do you think Kyler fits into this whole mix of quarterbacks these days?
So I love this contrast here, and that's a really good question as well, because the thing is, there's two different type of teams that are facing off at each other that have different types of building blocks and how they built themselves to become contenders. And I can say the Eagles are contenders because they've already been to the Super Bowl. So in the last 2 years, so you have a team that built up all the talent around their quarterback. Now, Jalen Hurts, as much as I like his leadership and whatnot, he's not the best quarterback in the league right now. He just is good for their scheme. On top of which, he has somebody in the backfield that's named Saquon Barkley, who I've been pounding the table for the Cardinals to get. But of course, never mind that. Saquon has been carrying the load so much that like he pissed off his wide receivers because of the fact that like they run that system just through Saquon himself, and he had 2,000 yards on the ground. How can you blame the guy? He's a big play machine. So you have a talented group on offense. You finally got the great foundation on defense. Good for them on drafting high and well on all these defensive players. Good on them for getting Jalen Carter. I believed in that guy, even if he had his issues. Look at what he's doing now. And then they went and got themselves those corners. And like those rookie corners are playing outstanding, phenomenal defense for Vic Fangio. They're playing the system like they did. And we know, like, Blake Murphy, Vic Fangio's system is what like started going around the league with playing off ball, playing more quarters,
Yep.
like heavy scheme quarter that which is like cover 6, cover 8, and then of course cover 4. And they're taking it with stride and just not only learning but like excelling at that. So good for that defense. And then you have on the other side, which there's the Chiefs and the Patriots have one thing that's in common that's so great. Great to elite quarterback, elite tight end, and an offensive system that
Mm-hmm.
like we don't really recognize the offensive coordinator. We recognize the coach Andy Reid, of course, but even with those Patriots, we didn't really recognize too much of the offensive coordinator because we always thought it's the quarterback that's running the system, and it was true. The Tom
Yeah.
Brady was running the system there. He had his guy in Gronk. He also had his slot receiver in Wes Welker or Julian Edelman, who there that's where the system like ran through. But the defense, like those
Mm-hmm.
those those Patriots defense
Right.
and the Chiefs defense are like stout. You have a mastermind. Bill Belichick and Spags are like the two brilliant minds in NFL when it comes to defenses. If anybody's taking anything from any coaches, it's picking apart from their playbooks or from their philosophies because of how elite they are when it comes to defense. And Spags has done he's done just such a great job to keep that Chiefs team in like contention, but to like
Mm-hmm.
make these players not only elite but buy into the system and then play well. I mean, McDuffie's like one of the elite corners, if not the elite corner in the league right now. They drafted him 2 years ago. Like he wasn't a rookie very long ago, and now he's just one of the best corners. And the crazy blitz designs that like Spags doesn't. And funny enough, Spags beat Tom Brady against when the Giants played the Patriots. I believe it was on our building,
Yes.
and that was Spagnola who came up with that defensive scheme.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a Patriots Chiefs regime, great defense, great defensive mindsets. Offense runs through like the quarterback. You
Yeah.
need a few pieces, and that's it. As long as you got a good to great offensive line, you're rolling with that. And then you have a talented team on the other side that's just talented from like the first guy to the last guy on that 22 squad, that 22 starter squad, that like now they're facing off against each other. We're going to see what the results are. So for the Cardinals, I think they're trying to go towards the road of let's get more talent. Let's surround Kyler Murray
Mm-hmm.
with more talent. You saw JG with his comments. I don't agree with them, but that's what he said. Those teams have great talent around them. Let's elevate the talent and get Kyler Murray that support so that we can make ourselves a contender with Kyler Murray as a quarterback.
Right. And that's, I think, the argument, because people will like to look at the quarterbacks in the AFC and say, all right, in order to contend and compete, you got to get one of those guys. Thing about that, of course, is Josh Allen. He's probably a one of one. Like, the closest thing that we've ever seen, at least with that, has been Cam Newton. And being able to see the level and caliber of play for that level of time, having a lot of the coaches, like we said, and being able to get back to these AFC championship games with the Bills is tremendous. You take a look also about Lamar Jackson. That's another one of one. These are guys, at least, who are just running into the Mahomes Chiefs wall, like we've talked about, similar to that Tom Brady wall, where it's just the level of quarterback play. And I think the Chiefs won a Super Bowl last year with less talent than they have this year. This year, they got a lot of mercenaries. DeAndre Hopkins, Hollywood Brown is on that team. Juju Smith-Schuster, at least, is someone who they're able to pick up, who was cut and released, fits well into that scheme. And being able to at least have the ability to win in these close games is a skill that we've seen the Chiefs have. On the other side, like you want to talk about, at least, is the Eagles' approach, which has been building up a solid team, whether it's through different additions, through different draft picks. One of the things we can talk about this year is how the Chiefs have had a very run-heavy team with Jalen Hurts, but the addition of Saquon Barkley having essentially going for that Super Bowl over breaking Eric Dickinson's single-season rushing record, which he could have done in the last week against the Giants, bringing in a Zach Bond, who's up for Defensive Player of the Year. Then with their draft picks, they drafted two guys into the secondary this year who are both rookies. Quinion Mitchell, who went ahead of the Cardinals picking, I believe it was Darius Robinson, and then Cooper DeJean, another guy who went ahead of Max Melton. Now, I will say this. I think it was Kyle Odegaard and some others have talked about, should the Cardinals have stayed at that spot, taken Cooper DeJean? How does that work? Being able to bring in a Vic Fangio that they wanted to get back when Jonathan Gannon left for the Cardinals back in 2023. He went to the Dolphins job instead. A lot of people think, at least in Philly, that Gannon screwed them over because, we were going to get Vic Fangio, and then Gannon decided he was going to leave. We thought that was our guy. Fangio goes to the Dolphins. They have a down year, end up with Matt Patricia. They get right back in there. I think when you look at the snap counts and everything, Cooper DeJean this year, he was a nickel safety type of blend for the Philadelphia Eagles. They also had a ton of talent along the defensive line, which include Jalen Carter having a phenomenal breakout season this year. Top 10 pick that you had there left over from, I believe it was that was left over from, unless I'm mistaken, was it the Carson Wentz trade? Just something ridiculous as far as with each of the different players that they were able to at least be able to get in Philly, just having a plethora of draft capital, getting some of those picks. I don't think it's necessarily a downside because the Cardinals, to me, when you look at Max Melton, he played outside all this year. He profiled as an outside cornerback. As far as the slot, Garrett Williams had a top 5 season. He was right up there with Cooper DeJean. So having 2 slot corners this year, don't think that would be able to fit in your defensive alignment as far as the skill set goes. And I think that we'll look back on that Max Melton being an outside corner who played well next year as being a solid move. It just goes to show that it really does come down to being able to make solid moves to be able to have some of these different additions, building a team around it. Jalen Hurts has not had to play at a Matthew Stafford, Patrick Mahomes type of level. He's had guys around him that he's essentially been able to be Chris Paul as a point guard. Like one of these plays in 4th and 5, they go for it. You get a one-on-one coverage to A.J. Brown, who the Eagles acquired in a trade. A little bit better trade, I think, than what the Cardinals we saw in their first-round pick swap out for Hollywood Brown. They've also built up their lines. They've got one of the best, if not the best, offensive line in the league. When they lost Jason Kelce to retirement, They had Cam Jurgens, a guy who Steve Keim and the Cardinals coveted. He steps up, has a Pro Bowl caliber season. He's hurt for the first half of the Eagles NFC Championship game. They take their guard, Landon Dickerson, move him over to center. He's all banged up. He plays a half, just enough for Cam Jurgens to be able to come in. Now they've got 2 weeks off for those guys before they're going in the Super Bowl. You look at Kansas City. They've had Trey Smith, who's going to be a free agent, huge quality guard that they've been able to have over there. They drafted Creed Humphrey, another guy that you look at, oh, Cardinals wanted to get one of these guys as an interior offensive lineman. They didn't get him. These teams that have been able to get back to the Super Bowl are teams that have built the lines consistently on the offensive and defensive side. But they've also been able to land top quality talent in the secondary as well. And I think, Marcos, what we're seeing is what's winning in today's NFL and what you're trying to build is part of the same model the Cardinals themselves are trying to build: a strong run game, building up the lines, having playmakers in the secondary. So that way, when it comes to covering receivers, you've got plenty of time, and then having some of those weapons that make it an incredibly difficult mismatch. I think the argument shouldn't be Mahomes or Josh Allen getting one of those guys. When we look at the playoffs, it does seem like with all of these playmakers here, the biggest question I think you have is one, can you build a team good enough to be able to get the Cardinals to a Super Bowl? And is Kyler Murray good enough for that? I think that we haven't seen that quite yet, is the question. It's going to be an interesting one for this year. But second, how much of this team do we talk about and just say, hey, Cardinals fans, we want to win a Super Bowl. Just get us a ring, please. Like, that's all we're looking for. We couldn't get one for Larry. How much of this that we always talk about every single year is going to be just getting a good enough team for that one single season, only to have the Chiefs just win a Super Bowl anyway with Pat Mahomes? That's kind of the same argument we had with Tom Brady years and years ago. Even with that Cardinals team that went to the Super Bowl, going up against Ben Roethlisberger, the Steelers, getting past the Patriots, getting past the Peyton Manning, you still ended up against the Steelers team that won multiple Super Bowls. And it just kind of ends up being this one case of with how the NFL is structured talent-wise, you're never probably going to be able to have that perfect team to make that dynasty happen. You kind of need a great, perfect situation of coaching staff, of players and talent all together in the same place to have that dynasty. What you can get, I think, is an Eagles team that has now gotten to multiple Super Bowls over the past couple of years with good rosters, roster resets, being able to have solid coaching and a solid general manager. I think that should be the goal for Arizona Cardinals fans: is can you get to being that second version of the Eagles in the NFC West? Something similar to saying, hey, you may be duking it out with the Niners and Eagles every year, but at least you're up in that category. Cardinals haven't gotten to that spot yet, but it seems like the approach that they're wanting to be able to take, I think that that's the way you go for it. Or I think the alternative is you go all or nothing. You trade away Kyler Murray. You kind of at least recognize that you're going to be stinking maybe for a year, bringing in what you hope is going to be an upgrade of a rookie quarterback on that contract. That's what the Eagles did with Jalen Hurts. That's what the Chiefs originally did with moving on from Alex Smith, trading up and getting a Patrick Mahomes. It's what the Bills did with moving up for getting a Josh Allen. I think that either approach you can win with. It really depends, though, on what is the structure you're going to have in terms of the organization, being able to bring guys in, and it comes to just getting your talent evaluations right. That, I think, is what's going to fall onto Gann and Monty Ossenfort and some of these guys. And so far, throughout this first 2 years with the Cardinals, we haven't seen them take that huge leap that I think a lot of people wanted them to take. But we have at least been able to see the team improve over the year and be able to organizationally be better. We talked about beginning of this show. Offensive line coach gets hired away to become an offensive coordinator. Being able to see other Cardinals players, like even with a Kaiser White, he's probably going to get a bigger contract on the free agent market than the Cardinals would have been able to pay him. These are all things that are important when it comes to Cardinals fans of getting what we want, which is a sustainable amount of success with the Cardinals, where it's not just a peak year under Kurt Warner and then back to the doldrums, a peak year under Carson Palmer, back to the doldrums, having a 2021 season where you start off 7-0 and then you get kind of embarrassed in the playoffs. These are all things that are really difficult to accomplish, but it looks like, at least in my opinion, if you're going to talk about having good building blocks for the future, you're at least seeing some of that stuff in place for Arizona, and now it's just going to be on the team to deliver that as it comes over the next season or two.
Yeah, and I am seeing like the Cardinals are going that direction of the Eagles in a way, because if you look at it from their offensive and defensive structure, on defense they're drafting and they're like they have So that 2022 team that went to the Super Bowl with the Eagles, it was filled with a bunch of veterans. It was filled with a bunch of like they were very talented. Like they had their people on the outside, like Bradbury, and then they had Darius Slay, who they still have, and then they had the linebackers and Kaiser White, and I forgot what the other big stout linebacker was for that team, but the one that plays for the Bears now. And then you had that defensive line that was filled with like big name people and whatnot. You had you obviously had what's call it? God, I can't believe I always blank on the names and everything like that. But this is one of my favorite players that left. Unfortunately, we didn't keep.
Oh, we're talking about with
You
Zach
know,
Allen and Byron Murphy, or two of the players at least, both Pro Bowlers this year.
no,
We didn't talk
no,
about those.
the outside linebacker, the Sam linebacker that I'm always talking about, the one that's playing for the Jets right now. So
Oh, you're talking about Hassan Reddick?
Hassan Reddick, yeah. So they had
Mm-hmm.
Hassan Reddick, and he had a 16 sack season that year. So they got the most out of him. And you had all those names on the defensive line, and then you had obviously a good safety room. And I'm gonna blink on names, but like one of the guys that left to Detroit and came back, he came back as well. So he's playing back at that nickel sash safety spot that he was. So they drafted and filled up those spots because I remember seeing the graphic of how many like players they were losing, and
Mm-hmm.
obviously they lost Jonathan Gannon as defensive coordinator, and they lost their offensive coordinator. So they kind of went through a line situation where they lost both of their coordinators and whatnot, and they lost a lot of players. Well, they rebuilt. They were already drafting like young guys to take over, but they continuously kept flooding that position, that defensive side of the ball with Georgia, like with Georgia like players and whatnot. But they kept drafting high and kept drafting young because they knew to themselves this core that we have is unstable. If you have veterans that are like in their prime, at some point they're going to start falling off. They're going to leave because of contract situations and whatnot. They're going to demand more money. So if you start drafting below that and start filling up that spot and getting these guys ready, eventually they're going to take over. And of course, it's I can't not say it's luck that you drafted two corners and they actually started playing at an elite level. That is lucky. You can't you there's a lot of that can go like with coaching wise and whatnot, but to get these guys, and I'm not saying like they got lucky because they weren't talented. I'm saying they got lucky they were able to draft these guys and then put them in the perfect system so they could be playing at elite level where they both get defensive rookie of the year, honors and whatnot. So they are doing what the Cardinals are trying to do with the shotgun approach with our drafting and whatnot. I will say though they drafted higher when it came to defense, so they weren't going with offensive players with the first round picks, or at least with our first round pick, they weren't going defensive. They weren't going offensive player. They were going defensive player because they had the offense already put together. But they also go with the shotgun approach when it comes to the offensive line. That offensive line
Mm-hmm.
has a like maybe first round picks, but they draft all over the place, and then they keep that pipeline. They coach them up. They have the best, obviously, offensive line coach in the league right now that can coach these people to become like very talented players. You just saw Kelsey left, Jurgens takes over, and he becomes an elite player. Why does that happen? Well, because they have that culture, they have that coaching, they have the pipeline, and they're not waiting for like a thinned out position to give out. No, they already have one or two bodies like ready to take over if that happens because they've been sitting there learning and about to take over and whatnot. So the Cardinals are going through that same philosophy with the Eagles. That's the right philosophy if you ask me. But you're right. Unless you're gonna get a Patrick Mahomes or a Josh Allen who's gonna be able to carry your team on the offensive side, you're gonna have to go through building and stuff. So that's just how it's gonna be.
Yeah, I think that's something at least we can go through and see. I think also the decision making for Arizona is going to be unique coming out of this offseason. Um, One of the comments here, Kyler's dead money manageable after the coming season if the offense doesn't take a leap. We also seen that if teams want to move on from quarterbacks, they can. I don't think that we're talking about a difficult situation. Like quarterbacks are now making up 50 million guaranteed or so, just whether it's a Dak Prescott, what we're going to see from others. You're going to have to either identify what you call a superstar quarterback and then have the benefit of the rookie quarterback contract and then be able to get that guy. Or you're going to have to look at the Eagles and say, hey, we just need to be able to build talent around, get a bunch of guys on rookie deals, be able to have that be the case, acquire some talent through some different trades, and then that's one of the ways that we can see progress being made. Now, for the looking forward to the offseason, let's talk about offensive free agents. We'll focus on defensive for another show because I think there's a lot more holes on the defensive side for Arizona. You're probably set when it comes to the Cardinals, knowing that you're at the quarterback spot. You're going to be starting Kyler for another year outside of some sort of trade and tank situation. Doesn't make sense to be able to do that, in my opinion, going into this season. I think it looks at being always a 2-year sort of rebuild, and then year 3 being the impact year. You're going to look at then the offensive line, the receivers. Do you bring in another tight end, and then the interior of the offensive line, and then the running back spot? So when you look at the top free agents this offseason, they're all receivers. You can talk about the biggest name and probably cream of the crop is going to be T. Higgins, the 26-year-old wide receiver who's a free agent. We will see if he ends up going from the Cincinnati Bengals because Joe Burrow's wanted to keep him around, keep Jamar Chase around. We haven't seen a contract yet for Jamar Chase or a T. Higgins like we have for Joe Burrow. It's going to be interesting to see how that goes. A lot of the guys that we're talking about, though, are free agents for a reason and are in some of their late 20s. For the receivers or in their 30s, let's go and start with the quarterback position. There is essentially one quarterback who's going to be the cream of the crop this offseason, and it's Sam Darnold. We'll see if the Vikings decide that they're going to let him go. I think this could be a tag and trade type of situation. You can't tell me that you're a team that's looking at a Sam Darnold like the Tennessee Titans going, would you rather have a rookie? Would you rather have a draft pick? Or would you rather say, hey, we can go and acquire a Sam Darnold, be able to have that at least as a starter for this year, who after his play last season, some people may say, hey, how much of this is the scheme that he was in, the talent situation, having Justin Jefferson, being able to have that other receiver that you had in, oh gosh, this is what I'm trying to remember who at least with, I want to say Jordan Addison was his name. There's going to be questions at least about that. Some also will say you can't let go of Sam Darnold. The rest of the guys on this list, if you're looking for the Cardinals, are not going to be at a starting quarterback level. You're going to be looking at a potential backup for Kyler Murray. And as a result, there's not that many names that really pop out to you overall here because you got guys who are almost 40 years old, 38 years old, a couple of backups who've popped up. The one name in particular that seems to pop out to me is I guess you could say Jacoby Brissett is one we've talked about for a couple of years as having a veteran capable backup for Kyler Murray, a guy who started games, who has more experience than a Clayton Tune. He's going to be a free agent after this season. The Patriots brought him in a year after the Browns had him essentially be that veteran backup. And he was with the Commanders as a veteran backup the year previously, unless I'm mistaken. Knows Drew Petzing's scheme, has mobility as a quarterback, has not played at a capable level of being able to win games consistently at the NFL level to be able to be more than this gap starting quarterback. That's the one name that I think pops out, and I think it would honestly not shock me if the Cardinals were able to bring him in, be able to kind of move Clayton Tune in a competition with that third spot. The other name that's intriguing to me, I think, is mostly because of the age and athleticism. That's going to be Justin Fields. It seems like the Steelers could bring back one of him or Russell Wilson to their team. It seems like he still has not been able to develop as well as a passer, but having the legs he has, the athleticism, we saw some trick plays that they were able to run, kind of make Russell throw the ball, have Fields kind of in some cases run the ball on fourth down. You don't have to change some of your offense around in that regard. That's, I think, been interesting. And you got some long time backups or guys who were previously starters. And a Jameis Winston at 31 years old who's just throwing the ball, was within that Browns system last year, showed some incredible 400-yard games and then some absolute clunkers as well. Seemed like he kind of fits that fringe starter level as well, but at a higher statistical level than maybe a Jacoby Brissett, while at the same time a higher interception level, perhaps. We got Mac Jones, at least, who had shown himself to have one capable year before kind of going into that list of first-round bust quarterbacks. You got Carson Wentz coming away from the Chiefs, and then Jimmy Garoppolo, the longtime Niners quarterback. Marcos, looking at this list for quarterbacks, if you're going to be the Cardinals and move on, There's not anything that I see that means that you should move away from a Kyler Murray, trade him away, sign a Sam Darnold at quarterback, and then expect to improve next season. Most of these guys here seem like they could fit the backup mold. A lot of them, at least like Andy Dalton or Joe Flacco, are just getting way, way up there in age. What are some of your thoughts on the quarterback free agent market? Because it's, to my opinion, it's not anything to covet this offseason.
No, unfortunately not. The only name I can see that makes any type of sense for us, and I don't think this is going to happen, but the only one that I can see is Justin Fields as being like the possible guy that we want to go to, not because of the fact that like he probably isn't going to demand as much money as like any of these other quarterbacks. Sam Darnold's going to be out because unless you had a way of like pulling Kyler Murray or trading him or doing whatever you can about Kyler, there's nothing you can do about that situation when it comes to like having all that dead money that's going to take over and then signing Sam Darnold and having like a bunch of money just designated for the quarterback position. And I don't think you're bringing Sam Darnold to be like a backup here. You're bringing him in
Right.
to start. So he's the only lone name up there that's going to be like the one where if you're going for him, you're not going to have Kyler Murray on the roster for him. But Justin Fields could come in once again and become one of those strong backups, a person who has untapped potential, has a lot of talent and whatnot, but hasn't been able to like see it flourish. So if you have him to run for a system like with Drew Petzing and whatnot, and he's like a 1 or 2 read guy, he could definitely work in our offensive system. We just got to see what's going on with him in Pittsburgh. So he's the only one that actually just makes some sense. Drew Lock, maybe. Marcus Mariota
Yeah.
is another one that's a maybe, but these guys are coming in to back up as well. So, well, like that's what it looks like for on our spot. We're not making a decision on Kyler till after this upcoming season.
Yeah, it's something where you're probably going to be looking to contend or compete. Let's say that Kyler has another injury that you don't want to see, and the team is competing. You don't want to basically have it go from hero to zero by putting a Clayton Tune out there who may or may not be able to actually carry the team at all. We haven't seen anything thus far. Usually, a veteran ends up being more reliable in terms of you at least know what you can expect from them. That's something I think we'll have to see. I would not be shocked if the Cardinals do grab one of these guys as more of a proven player, not to necessarily push Kyler. Maybe in the case of like Jameis or let's say like a higher end guy such as you want to talk about, you know, say it's a Jimmy Garoppolo or a Carson Wentz end up having a little bit of a bounce back for the most part in their 33-year-old age in the system. Don't think that's as likely. Speaking of not as likely, the running back market for the Cardinals, some of the top names including Aaron Jones, Steelers Najee Harris. You can take a look maybe at a Nick Chubb type of back who's at 29 years old. Javonte Williams is leaving Denver. This is a pretty down their list for the most part. The one guy who actually had a promising year for them on this list for the most part, who is still young, would be J.K. Dobbins, who's had some traumatic, awful injuries. He had a solid year, even spent time hurt for the Chargers this season. You've got your guys already, if you're Arizona, in my opinion. You've already got James Conner in the Pro Bowl. You drafted a third round running back who got time last year. You have another guy who you like at least and was able to have some big touchdowns this year as your kind of running back 3 in and then you got your kick returner, at least for the most part, who's locked up for a long time. So just being able to look at the Cardinals running back situation with Amari DiMercado and the DJ Dallas, I think that if you're going to do anything, you would draft a back this year. Maybe if you like a running back enough that you say, hey, James Conner, we got him for the next 2 years, but we're looking at how he ended the season hurt. He's getting up there in age. If there's a spot where he drops off a cliff and we want that 1-2 punch to kind of pick up in 2026, where maybe it's James last year, maybe you take one of those guys. But otherwise, it feels like you're pretty set. I don't even know if you would want to sign one of these guys off of the list. I think you would draft a guy to be able to then have him compete with Amari DiMercado and DJ Dallas, see if you can get that upgrade, and maybe that ends up being what you look for in terms of the run game. Especially when you talk about the running back class this year is pretty good. I think the fact the Cardinals got Trey Benson last year means they can then look at other positions, knowing that they've kind of got their running back combo of 2025 already under the roster.
Yeah, when it comes to like the running backs, I don't think we're gonna. So since you have James Conner signed for a couple of years, the thing is and especially when it comes to Aaron Jones, Najee Harris, like these guys are high. Like, they're gonna be demanding quite a bit of money and stuff. I would never ever have to like think about like adding anybody to this room because I think we have a good foundation. We already have like even to our practice squad player and Carter and whatnot. We have like the bodies to be able to fill that in and whatnot. And say what you want about DeMarcado, the guy can run block and the guy can pass
Hmm.
block. So that's the reason why he gets so many snaps and whatnot. So I like when it comes to like the running back group, I think we're set. The only thing you would want to do is get somebody like even Jake. Oh my God, J.K. Dobbins is down there and whatnot. Even he's like a starter type of. Yeah, you're looking for like
Yeah.
just a second stringer, third stringer in this situation. But I think we're set when it comes to running backs.
Yeah, no, I think that was very clear. Also, just to kind of flashback, speaking of quarterback, it wouldn't shock me if Kirk Cousins hits the free agent market, but after the season he has had, it's going to be really interesting to be able to see what goes on with each of those.
Yeah.
Let's do a quick, at least, overlook of the receiver and the offensive line spots because receiver, I'm going to be honest with you guys. Like, unless you go after a T. Higgins while Marv is on that deal, and I think that he's going to go to a team like the Patriots who have more cap room, a much bigger need. Maybe you can get in another veteran, such as like you can say, hey, we could bring in like a Brandon Cooks type. Maybe you could have a Keenan Allen who's more of a larger slot receiver. I think that this is a spot where maybe you end up looking to the draft for the Cardinals as far as trying to be able to bring in someone who you think could be another guy who could go on the outside, who could push Michael Wilson. The one guy I will say that if I had to pick someone who's had production, who's had connection, I don't think I'd go with a Marquise Brown type here. I think that you're probably going to be saying, unless you're going to run a lot more of this 11 personnel with three wide receivers and putting him into the slot more. We haven't seen him excel as much as a flanker outside of that 2022 season. The guy who I like on this list, honestly, is Darius Slayton from the Giants. He's larger size, at least. I believe he's at 6'1", 6'2". He's had production outside as a receiver, about some 600 or so yards. And he's got a bit more speed than Michael Wilson. Maybe you could kind of have some of that size with the run blocking coming in a little bit back and forth. Demarcus Robinson's another guy at age 30 who he was kind of that reliable guy for the Rams when Puka Nacua was out and Cooper Kupp was hurt. I don't really see that much on the list that either you should pay with a Chris Godwin coming off of injury, a guy who's going to make a lot more in terms of an Amari Cooper or Keenan Allen, and a Deontay Johnson's been passed by for the entire league as far as whether it's character items. I don't see a reunion with DeAndre Hopkins or a Marquise Brown in the works, but Darius Slayton, sign me up for that if that's the case, Marcos.
Yeah, I agree with you. I know that idea was like kind of like slandered that like Darius Slayton is just like you're just going to like the dollar store and you're picking up whatever and whatnot. But Darius Slayton would make sense in this system because if you go and get T. Higgins, you have to pay the guy, obviously. So that's less cap space for a guy who is
For
probably
a
gonna
tight end
like not
system, they use two tight ends more than like most teams and three tight ends more than anyone last year. So
exactly. So why are you gonna have like a high end like he has the same body build as Marvin Harrison Jr. You're gonna have to have him take a step back for Marvin, and then you're gonna have T. Higgins running those same routes that Marvin is running just because you want to get somebody that's in here that's gonna coach up talent. Yeah, that move would spend so much money. It would kind of throw our wide receiver room into disarray. So Darius Slayton's the one that makes sense because if you're not gonna keep I keep forgetting, like it always like passes through my mind, but the slot receiver that we signed for this year that's gonna also be a free agent, we could just put like Darius Slayton in that same role, and I like him better because he
yeah,
has
Zay
speed,
Jones. Yep.
he has size. Yeah, Zay
Yeah.
Jones, exactly.
Yeah. No, I think those are at least something that you can look at if you're a Cardinals fan. As far as, and I think Pro Football Focus's Cam Robinson actually did say Raiders or Cardinals are the best fit for him. Last, let's wrap up real quick with a minute or two left to go over the offensive line. This is the one spot where I think if you're the Cardinals, you could make a splash for this next year with the cap room you have. Most of these offensive linemen, if you're talking about it, are going to be hitting the market because there's issues. Cam Robinson wasn't able to stay as healthy. I believe that he actually went from the Jacksonville Jaguars to the Minnesota Vikings as a replacement. He has had some decent seasons, some that haven't been the case as a left tackle. Some other guys like a Zach Martin and Brandon Scherf are kind of signing 1-year deals as they're 33 and 34 years old. The Rams, Joe Noteboom is hitting free agency as a tackle. You're probably, if you're the Cardinals, looking though at an interior offensive lineman, which could include Will Hernandez could be re-signed at that right guard spot. But at left guard, you're probably going to be in more of a go for it year, signing more of this higher up veteran, similar to what the Detroit Lions did. They signed Kevin Zeitler to a 1-year contract and made that push to see if they could get to a championship game or a Super Bowl. Some of the guys on this list, like a Jedrick Wills, is someone who just has not really blossomed or developed, at least is how they were hoping to. Same with Olaric Jackson. Will Hernandez is, of course, the guy who's there on this list. Maybe you bring him back, but after that level of injury, it's one of the things that'll be really interesting. Could you see him signing for the Arizona Cardinals on a similar deal for 2 years and then $4.5 million a year? I think that's an area where you could just bring him back and then see if he's ready for being able to pop up. The guy who would be really intriguing to me here would be bringing in a athletic freak like a Mekhi Becton in from the Eagles, paying him a decent contract. Because he's one of those guys who there's been issues he had at tackle. He moves to the Eagles and hasn't that good quality offensive line, ends up excelling. You also have, as far as the offensive tackle spot, one of the possibilities, could you take a Jonah Williams, move him into right guard, which is part of the reason, unfortunately, it seems he left Cincinnati, was he didn't want to play a guard spot. And then could you bring one of those tackles at least in for a year, such as whether it's a Note Boom or the other name I'm thinking of at least is... I have to remember a little bit down the list at least. Like even a DJ Humphries at least could come back in, maybe if he wants to play at right tackle for a year after that injury. This is the spot where I think that we could definitely see the Cardinals bring in someone else to start at a guard spot. Two of those guys who are also some of their own free agents, and Kelvin Beachum and Will Hernandez, could come back. Last thoughts here on the offensive line. Since I don't think we'll go over tight end just yet, I think that the Cardinals are probably going to be set for next year. If anything, I would draft a cheap tight end at some point in the later rounds to be that tight end 3, or just bring back the guy who's already done that in Elijah Higgins. What are your thoughts on the offensive line market, Marcos, as we wrap up for today?
Well, like another one of those situations is with like running back and tight end. I think we don't even have to go over that because of how set we are and how superstar heavy we have. So when it comes to like the offensive line, I like what you said about DJ. I think we should like bring him back and just bring him back as like a, hey, you don't have to be a starter. Obviously, that position was filled by your successor, but you can come in and we'll give you a small contract. We'll like, resign you. I want to keep Will Hernandez in the room. And I know that his injury history is not so well and whatnot, but the big name that's out there is obviously Trey Smith, giving him a lot of money, paying him as a top offensive lineman out there. Well, where Hernandez was putting up like also very solid to above average, like grades and his tape was just like, I love this tape when it comes to like pass protection. I know that his run blocking isn't as stout as like maybe a Trey Smith, but his pass protection is just like elite when it comes to like how good he is in that. And he also levels that right tackle. Beach, you might as well just keep him in the room. The guy's the constant in our like in our offensive line group. But those are the moves that I would like what I would like for them to do, because even though they're not too expensive and whatnot, and they're not like home run moves and stuff, there's times where you can sign like someone like a Trey Smith and he'll like be an all pro for you for the upcoming years, but they're going to go into a bidding war over him. So yeah. I'm not sure if the Cardinals are willing to do that.
Yeah, Trey Smith's going to get a huge, potentially market resetting guard deal this offseason. Mekhi Becton could have a huge deal. Also, at least we're looking at some of these guys who are a bit younger. We'll see if the Cardinals, what they do with someone like a Carter O'Donnell, if they're going to bring him back or not. But a lot of the names, at least on this list, are some pretty good ones. Even Josh Myers, I know, has started some games for the Green Bay Packers before. Tevin Jenkins is set to hit the open market. He's been a solid guard who's had injury issues. One of the things I think we can say, Marcos, is that the Cardinals are probably, because of how you've stacked things up with how the money, they're going to be a bit more aggressive in free agency this offseason. I don't think they'll be too aggressive. I don't think it's a go for broke sort of year. I don't think it's a go for broke sort of GM and head coach, but I think that there will be moves to be made. We'll talk about the defensive free agents next time as the Cardinals look to fill a lot of holes and find some edge rushers as well as some departing guys. And we can talk at least, hopefully, about the Super Bowl results. We'll be back at least here probably in about 2 weeks or so. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. For Marcus Lebrad, who's got to run at least right now, from what it sounds like, at least for the most part. So we're closing up our show here. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Follow us on @RedbirdReboot on x.com, twitter.com. Make sure that you follow us at least as well, Blake Murphy 7 and at Pancake Soul. Thank you guys again. Hey, we're done with another show. We're almost done with another season in the books with the Super Bowl just ahead. Chiefs, Eagles again. We'll see how that all goes. But for Marcos, I'm Blake Murphy, and this has been the Redbird Reboot podcast. You've been rebooted. It's time for us to log off. Have a good Saturday, everyone.